Hey guys, so today I'm just going to be talking a little bit about Section 230 of the Federal Communications Decency Act of 1996 and why it should still stand and what it would mean for the internet if it was to be overturned. As we're all probably aware by now, the law generally precludes providers from being held liable for information or content provided by a third party on their platform, but it doesn't prevent them from being held legally responsible for information that they have developed or for activities unrelated to third party content. Just a quick overview on the two primary sections of the law that provide the framework for this immunity that I mentioned. The first section, 230C1, specifies that service providers and users may not, quote, be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So the first section basically means that these platforms, these owners of these platforms, aren't going to be held responsible for any kind of information or content that is put up on their platform by someone that's not them. And then the second section, 230C2, states that service providers and users may not be held liable for voluntarily acting in good faith to restrict access to, quote, obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable content. This part kind of affirms what the First Amendment implies in that private companies don't have to host speech that they don't want to on their platform because it violates their policy or their values or whatever. And then there's exceptions to the law that I don't need to get into right now, but I think that there's a good defense for both sides. I would argue, though, that overturning the section would lead to more harm than good. The first thing I just wanted to say was, like our textbook states, the Section 230 is critical to the functioning of the internet and arguably the most influential law to protect the kind of innovation that has allowed the internet to thrive since 1996. Within the bill, the authors explicitly say that the law is, quote, to preserve the vibrant and competitive free market that presently exists for the internet and other interactive computer services. These protections are definitely still needed because while Section 230 may lead to some issues, if it was overturned, there would be way more issues. Our freedom of speech would be forced to be vastly limited due to how much we use these platforms. In an internet age, most of us are communicating, interacting, expressing ourselves on these platforms almost daily, sometimes constantly, and just the sheer size of these websites. I wrote a couple stats here. Facebook alone has more than 1 billion users, and YouTube users upload 100 hours of video every minute. So it just doesn't really make sense to think that these organizations would be able to prevent objectionable content from appearing on their site. And so rather than face potential liability for their users' actions, a lot of these sites just wouldn't host user-generated content, or at least not in the way that they currently are, which would just mean that they would have to be actively engaging in censoring us in some way, whether it be some kind of pre-approval process or just like watching the content that we put and then like approving like what's okay and what's not. I just feel like this would be so difficult for the flow of information on these platforms. One article kind of summed it up and they said, ultimately these actions would result in all of us having less of a public square, fewer information streams, and a less rich internet experience. And just overall, overturning the Section 230 would limit free speech in the marketplace of ideas. And then the last thing I was going to touch on was just the main argument for the opposite side and why the people that think overturning Section 230 are a little misguided is because I can see the point. A lot of people think it's unfair that these giant media conglomerates have so much say over what we receive as news, because a lot of us just culturally, these sites have just developed to become so popular that many of us use them as sometimes like our exclusive like news sources. and the biggest incident, like, involving, like, I'm sorry, I lost my place. Yeah, the biggest incident involving this kind of issue was Trump getting banned from Twitter, some of his tweets being banned. The opposing side is basically arguing that while these are private companies, they've become so huge and people use them so much that it's unfair that they get to dictate what is on their platform still. So people think that overturning this section would force them to host speech that they may not agree with, that may violate their values. And I definitely see the point, and I think that that's something that should definitely be addressed. But regardless of political affiliation, I just feel like we can all agree that our freedom of speech is essential to being an American, and overturning this section could potentially lead to way more issues, because opening the door for censorship in general can open the door for way more censorship down the road. So that's why I think that Section 230 needs to stand.